Before I talk about the pluperfect subjunctive and the imperfect subjunctive, I want to start with the infinitive because, well, that's what we're going to end up starting with. First of all, we start off with our present active infinitives. Those are our second principal parts. Those are things that we're used to seeing, like amare, docere, ducere, and audire. To make those passive, all we're doing for the first, the second, and the fourth is changing the E to an I. We take off the ERE for our thirds and add an I. Translations for amare to love, amare to be loved, docere to teach, docere to be taught, ducere to lead, duci to be led, audire to hear, and audire to be heard. Key translation for the passive is that be verb and plus the ed. We also have perfect active and perfect passive infinitives as well. And this is when we take the third principal part of a word. For example, I have amawi right here. I'm going to start off with amawi because that is my perfect. For example, here I have amawi. Amawi is our third principal part. That is going to be our perfect stem. It's going to be our perfect active stem. So that's why I get this amawi in the middle of that. Remember, we had ISSE to our third principal part to come up with our perfect active infinitive, and we translate it with have plus ed. So here I have amawisi, to have loved, dokuisi, to have taught, dukuisi, to have led, audawisi, to have heard. Perfect passive, I'm going to take this fourth principal part. That's going to be the base. I'm going to add it to, I'm going to essa to the end of it. That gives me my perfect passive infinitive. Amadum essa, to have loved, doctum essa, to have been taught, ductum essa, to have been led, auditum essa, to have been heard. Again, key translation is to use that be verb been plus our ed. That's what changes it from active to passive. The reason I bring these up is because our new grammatical focus is pluperfect and imperfect subjunctives. Both of the pluperfect and imperfect subjunctives come from these infinitives. Here I have amari and amawisi. Amari is our present active infinitive. Amawisi is my perfect active infinitive. All I'm really doing is I have amawisi, that's my perfect infinitive. If I add an ending to it, either the M, the S, the T, the moose, it doesn't matter what I add to it, this creates the pluperfect subjunctive. That's a pluperfect subjunctive. Fairly easy. Amare, that's my present active infinitive. Once again, I add an ending, the M, the S, the T, the moose, T, doesn't matter. That creates my imperfect subjunctive. So my imperfect and pluperfect subjunctive are created by my perfect and my present active infinitives. So what does subjunctive mean and what do I do with it? No, the subjunctive is not some place that you put your prom date. The subjunctive is something that I use for clauses in a sentence that really can't exist by themselves. We're going to start off with cum clause. A cum clause has a temporal or a causal relationship with the rest of the sentence. Here I've highlighted after the king had left. This in our language is an adverbial clause. Well, Latin's going to use a bunch of different clauses to give you this effect. One of them is called the cum clause. It uses a subjunctive. The basic job of the subjunctive is to create a little bit of doubt. So in this case, after the king had left, well, we weren't really there. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't happen. We're pretty sure it did. So in Latin, they're going to use the subjunctive in these kinds of clauses. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to start off with using explicit. You can see it here. I've got some nice little colors with it. I've given you cum in the black so that you can see it, recognize it. It will always start the clause out. It will always start the clause out. It will have a subjunctive in there. In this case, we have the subjunctive explicit. And then after that, the rest of the sentence is normal. It has, we'll call it as its verb. There's no change. But the cum clause, the only change you have is that you're using a subjunctive instead of a regular verb. I'm going to translate it just like I would the pluperfect. After the king had left, Saulus called the soldiers to him. Why is it different? Why do they choose to change the form of this word instead of just using the pluperfect? Well, it's very simple. It's Latin. Next, I want to talk about the pluperfect subjunctive. Here, I've used it once again. I have exerit, again, a part of a cum clause. This is the same sentence, but it's translated just slightly different. After the king called, Saulus called the soldiers to him. In this case, the action called, the king called, I'm sorry, that's wrong. My bad. It should be after the king left. I don't know why I had called. I actually do, but I don't want to explain it right now. So after the king left. The reason that there's a difference in the translation has to do with the tense. As you can see here, the word left is being translated differently than what it was up here. Up here we use the word had left because it's pluperfect, and down here with the imperfect we use just the left. I want to explain this to you, and hopefully this will make a little bit of sense. The imperfect subjunctive is translated as the same time as the main verb. So if the main verb happens in the past, then you will translate the imperfect subjunctive in the past. If the main verb happens in the present tense, you will change the imperfect to the present tense. It basically just attaches itself to the tense of the sentence. The pluperfect is going to happen before the main action of the sentence. So if the action happens in the past, the pluperfect will happen before the past. That's why we will use had. As a matter of fact, if you use the word had, any time that you see the pluperfect subjunctive, shouldn't have a problem, because the pluperfect always happens before everything else. Imperfect needs to be the same time as the main verb, though. Let's see what happens if I make a couple of changes here. Here, by simply changing wokawit to wokat, all I did was change it to present tense. I've changed the way that the sentence is translated. I've highlighted both things in red at the bottom. After the king leaves, Saulus calls the soldiers to him. I told you that the imperfect tense basically piggybacks onto the main verb of the sentence. And in this case, the main verb is wokawit. Because wokat is present tense, so my imperfect subjunctive will translate at the same time as the main verb. The tense of the subjunctive does not dictate the main tense of a sentence. As a matter of fact, they rely on the other verbs to create their tense and translation. Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's see what happens whenever I change the pluperfect. I'm going to change what? I'm going to change the main verb. Here I changed wokawit to wokat. After the king had left, Saulus calls the soldiers to him. That's just fine. I can use that had left. Don't have to really change it unless I choose to. You could use, for example, the word left. After the king left, Saulus calls the soldiers to him. Because wokat is in the present tense, the pluperfect is being used in the exicit, so it needs to happen before the main verb. The main verb is in the present, so I could use the perfect tense, imperfect, or pluperfect tense to translate exicit. I feel like that the perfect sounds better. After the king left, Saulus calls the soldiers to him. If you choose to use had left will never be wrong. Using had will never be wrong if you're not sure what to use. But there are times where it doesn't sound as good as the perfect.